Good evening. It's wonderful to be with you again, to be back with you again. My name is Cisco Walker. I'm an evangelist in the International District. I'm here tonight with Pastor Alonzo Garcia for New Life Church of God. And what we're doing tonight, we're going to look at some things that are, we're going to take kind of a little different approach. Instead of starting out with a golden text, I'm going to start out with a very famous quote by Karl Marx. And this is what the quote says. It says, "Religion is the sigh of the oppressed creature, the heart of a heartless world, and the soul of a soulless condition. It is the opium of the people." And I want to balance this with 2 Corinthians chapter 11, starting in verse 23. This is Paul speaking. He says, "Are they ministers of Christ? I speak as a fool, I am more. In labors more abundant, in stripes above measure, in prisons more frequently, in deaths often. From the Jews 5 times I received 40 stripes minus 1. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. A night and a day I have been in the deep. In journeys often, in perils of water, in perils of robbers, in perils of my own countrymen, in perils of the Gentiles, in perils of the city, in perils of the wilderness, in perils of the sea, in perils among false brethren. In weakness and toil, in sleeplessness often, in hunger and thirst, in fastings often, in cold and nakedness. Besides the other things, what comes upon me daily, my deep concern for all the churches." And tonight we're going to look at, is religion the opium of the people? Is this statement true? And I think that we will find as we think about this and as we look at this, one thing that, Pastor, that me and you, we tend to come into agreement on is that me and you are not satisfied with just black and white, cut and dry answers. Because the more that you look at things, the more that you think about something, the more that you meditate about something, we seem to agree that things open up. And it's through the conversation, it's through what takes place with prayer, meditation, and study that we see that things aren't necessarily as black and white and as easy as the church wants to make them, right?
I would totally agree. You know, it really underscores something that I was talking about over the last few weeks. We were talking about, embracing the value of women in the church.
Yeah.
And I think that, a person who says, well, I didn't put that there, God put that there, is a person who's not committed to digging into what the word actually says. They are committed to repeating and paraphrasing what they have been taught, the way they've been taught, and they are committed to sticking to an incredibly narrow interpretation. And people are going to say, well, you have to interpret the Bible narrowly. Totally agree. But it's that passage then that we run into in Paul's letter to Timothy, where he says, in the presence of God and of Christ Jesus, who will judge us, 2 Timothy chapter 4, and of Christ Jesus, who will judge the living and the dead, and in view of his appearing kingdom, I give you this charge: preach the word. Be prepared in season and out of season. And then these are words that sometimes people like to be the person doing it, but they don't like to receive it, right? Correct, rebuke, and encourage with great patience and careful instruction. And that's often not the way that we see people treated by evangelical Christians. There is not a whole lot of great patience. There is not a whole lot of careful instruction. For the time will come when men will not put up with sound doctrine. Instead, to suit their own desires, they will gather around them a great number of teachers to say what their itching ears want to hear. And I think that Karl Marx, in large part, is addressing that context when he says that it is the opiate of the people. He is saying
Yeah.
that over time, what his observation was that people were using Christianity as a means of escapism. They wanted to hear what they wanted to hear. They wanted to say that what they were doing was compassionate, even if their actions belied the compassion that is found in Scripture. And
and we see that. And I was looking today, I was trying to learn a little bit more about the subject today. During the time that Marx would have penned this particular phrases, he would have written this particular piece of literature, the opium dens were popular, and so people were going to the opium dens, and people were, they were checking out, they were escaping. And the more that I've looked at this statement, like, there's a part of me that says, okay, it isn't right, but there's a part of me where I see within the realm and within the context of evangelicals, there are some who escape, there are some who hide, there are some who are not engaging with the world that Christ came to save. And so I've seen a lot of different dimensions, actually looking at this statement. And one thing we have to do, whether it be Marx, right, whether it be Lenin, whether it be Nietzsche, whether it be Camus, whether it be Foucault, whether it be von Sartre, we have to look at their statements. Evangelicals should look at philosophers' statements. Most of them will not. They're afraid of them.
Yep.
But we have to look at them beyond just the pop form, beyond just the God is dead. We have to know God is dead and we have killed him, and we cannot, there is not enough water to wash the blood off of our hands because we have killed him. That says a whole lot more than just the three words, God is dead, right? So we have to learn to look at these things, and we have to learn to try to analyze these things. Now, Marx's statement paints an unrealistic picture of a religion that is full of blissful moments and happy faces. And this just isn't the case. Now, what I'm not trying to do is to tell people that there is not joy unspeakable,
right,
that there is not breakthrough, that there is not great light, illumination, revelation. But if you're an evangelical, and if you're truly pursuing Christ, and if you're leaving the seashore and launching out into the deep, right? If you're truly engaging in genuine Christianity, it's not always going to be blissful. It's not always going to be happy. It's not always going to be what movies and most of your Christian books, at least here in America, make it out to be. Because the words of the Apostle Paul, they clearly show us that Christianity at times is not an easy path to trod. It's not a pleasant path to go down. It's not a happy, euphoric, blissful path of existence. It can't be that way all the time. It should not be that way all the time. But why do evangelicals want to make it that way all the time?
Well, I think that there's a few things there, right? Like what you're introducing is such a broad thing. So let's narrow it into a couple little components. One is evangelicals are preaching what we would refer to as the good news, right?
Yeah.
And what is the good news? From the biblical perspective, we are making the argument that the good news is that Jesus Christ came to save sinners. However, there's a big disconnect in that evangelical Christians often forget that the heredity that they claim is only by adoption. Namely, those who are Christians are generally Gentile. Those who are Gentile were outside the covenant promises of Abraham. Those who are outside the covenant promises of Abraham endured suffering like everybody else. The difference was the Jewish people had hope for that which was to come. Now, evangelical Christians and evangelicalism, this is one of the things that Marx is addressing, this Christianity from the mindset of it's verbally saying I want to do good, but I am not actually helping the community. I am creating an imperial structure that says that you are different from me and therefore there is a wall. So Christians were on the other side of that wall. And that's one of the things that Paul addresses in Ephesians. He says, you who were far off were brought near by the blood of Christ. And maybe Paul gives us some of the deepest revelation about what it is to enjoy the life of a Christian while enduring suffering. And we can point to his letter to the Philippians or a few others, but I'm going to draw from 2 Corinthians chapter 1 and picking it up, I guess, in verse 6. He says, if we are distressed, it is for your comfort and salvation. So the statement here, if we are distressed, it is for your comfort and your salvation. He is making the statement that it's not a utopia. And it gets worse, right? He says, if we are comforted, it's for your comfort, which produces in you patient endurance of the same sufferings we suffer. And our hope for you is firm, he says in verse 7, because we know that just as you share in our sufferings, it's a lot of suffering, you will share also in our comfort. And in the capstone for this, he says, we do not want you to be uninformed, brothers, about the hardships we suffered in the province of Asia. We were under great pressure, I didn't put that there, God put that there, right? Far beyond our ability to endure, so that we despaired even of life. So here we have Paul, who wrote 2/3 of the New Testament, saying, there was a period in time that I wished I was dead. Now that does not speak to this idea that it's all sunshine and rainbows. That does not speak to the idea that there is a utopia and a dystopia. But in Christianity, we're the kind of people that say, well, I read the last page and it says that we win, Brother Walker. So since I read this last page, we win, then I'm just going to ignore that suffering exists in the world because maybe financially or emotionally it doesn't impact me.
And if we win, and if we know that we won, then why should, if we know that we win whatever they think they won, if we know that we win, then why should we fight? If we know that we win, then why should we run? If we know that we win, then why should we labor? Because what difference does it make? Because in the end we win. You know, that's never sat well with me.
Never.
I've never understood that, and that's just thrown out there. That's just rattled off, and that's one of the reasons that I think that we're looking at statements like this. I remember we were in downtown Cleveland. We were ministering in a homeless shelter, Metropolitan Lutheran Metropolitan Mission. We were there ministering, me and a friend of mine years ago. And I remember that for whatever reason, the young man read this portion of scripture that I opened with, 2 Corinthians 11:23-28, talking about Paul's life, the things that he endured for the sake of Christ. And seriously, the Holy Spirit was moving in the midst of that Bible study, and people began, there was probably 15 to 18 people in that Bible study. And the ones, it was like the wheat the chaff was separated from the wheat. People got up out of their chairs and they walked out of that room. And half of the Bible study left because they began to realize that me living for Jesus is not going to be a cakewalk. That me living for Christ is going to involve persecution, hardship, trial, suffering. And I believe that people began to realize it, like they weren't going to escape that, and it made them uncomfortable.
Yep.
Just like it makes you and I and those who read it, if they're honest with themselves, some of these passages, they challenge us and these passages will make us uncomfortable. There's people in the fivefold ministry tonight. They need to hear this. They need to read this. They need to remember this verse again for themselves, to remember that Christianity at times is filled with suffering. At times it is filled with persecution. At times it is filled with hardship and difficulty, but it's all worth it. But it is a part of being a Christian that I think many people want to ignore.
Yeah.
Right?
You bring something that I think is really important to clarify, and I certainly don't in any way want to hijack any part of this topic, but the subject of persecution, right? I run into way more people than I should that say, well, they had a public meeting at a government facility and they wouldn't let Christians talk, and they call that persecution. That's not persecution.
No.
That's being out of order in a structure that isn't made for the expression of Christian doctrine. And people say, well, the government is the government of the United States is a Christian government. It is not.
No, it's not.
So persecution in the structure of people having free will, persecution is not people disagreeing with you or people saying you can't do that here. That's not persecution. But there are lots of people, and maybe some watching this right now, that have said, well, I went to, such and such, I went to a city council meeting and they wouldn't let me read out of the book of Isaiah. That's not persecution. That's not the place where you read out of the book of Isaiah. Can you minister the gospel without using the Bible? Certainly. The New Testament disciples did it before the New Testament was written.
Mm-hmm. And Paul did it.
Paul did it before the New Testament. He was writing the New Testament. No one else had the letters but the churches he sent them to. So this idea of persecution, we're going to face persecution, but in the United States, no one that I know has suffered actual persecution. No one has been arrested for being a Christian. They've been arrested for being
obnoxious
and insolent.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But that has nothing.
Yeah.
If they were drinking beer and throwing Molotov cocktails, it'd be the same thing.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
There are Christians who have done like bombing of abortion clinics and stuff like that. None of that is okay.
Yeah.
Right. And so people take this idea of persecution and they say, well, the godly have to be willing to suffer persecution. Yes. Most of the things that we experience in America are not persecution. So, yes, persecution is the thing that exists, but there are people that take that to a level that I think persecution is not defined as.
Yeah, there was a Bible professor when I went to school years ago, and he says, you can be he says being a witness for Christ is something completely different than being obnoxious for Christ.
Absolutely.
And like you see a lot of, unfortunately, you're right. You see people being obnoxious for Christ. Like Christians can't have a conversation with people that they don't agree with. But yet we want to criticize the left for the same thing.
Yep.
But evangelicals can't sit down at a table and have a conversation with somebody who doesn't have the same views as they do.
Yep.
And that is why we can't reach people.
Yep.
That is why we become sectarian.
Yep.
That is why our lamps have gone out.
That's
right. That is why we have all of the problems that we have, is because we can't even talk to people who don't have the same opinions that we do. And we're not even interested. That's why we don't learn anything. That's why we don't move forward. That's why we don't break new ground.
Yep.
Because you have to look at things from different angles, from different perspectives, and they can't all be yours. And that's why we become prideful. We become elevated. And instead of sitting down and eating with tax collectors and sinners, we want them out. We don't want anything to do with them because we want to have our own little playpen and have everybody else out of it.
It's how we demonstrate or manifest being an accidental Pharisee.
Yes.
If I were to draw just briefly from another writing of Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 9, and I'm just going to summarize the first part of this. Starting in verse 19, he says, though I am free and belong to no man, I make myself a slave to everyone. Slaves to everyone don't complain about persecution. They just serve, right?
Yeah.
They
don't have a voice.
Right.
Yeah.
And now why does he do it? And in this, I think I'm reading out of the NIV. It's just what I had right here. The reason that he does it, this is one of my favorite verses. Though I am free and belong to no man, I make myself a slave to everyone to win as many as possible. To the Jews, I became like a Jew to win the Jews. To those under the law, I became like one under the law. And then he says, though I myself am not under that Jewish law, because I've been set free. So as to win those under the law. To those not having the law, I became like, he goes on, and then he says, to the weak, I became weak to win the weak. Right. I became all things to all men, that I might by all means save some by winning them to faith in Christ. And then he says, and this is what I love, he says, now this I do for the sake of the gospel, that I may be a partaker of it with you. And evangelical Christianity, and what Marx was refuting, is that Christians say, I want you to be a partaker with me. And that's not what Paul's talking about. Paul is talking about setting those things aside so that I can be a partaker, so I can share it with you.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Let's explore this for a second. It says, to some within the realm of so-called Christendom, religion is to them, in a strange sense, an opiate or a stupefying narcotic. Okay, I have this for an example. What I've called happy face religion, right? Happy face religion.
The frozen smile.
Yeah, this type of Christianity is unrealistic to the outside world. The world sees this generic image of, quote, shiny, happy church people and dismisses Christian faith altogether. Happy face religion appears to the outside world as fake, superficial, and what Marx would say, or Lenin, too good to be true. Right?
Absolutely.
What do you think about happy face religion?
Well, so I think that there is an absolute truth to the idea that there is in Spanish, in the group that I have, that helped disciple and mature me, they call it sonrisas congeladas, frozen smiles, right? Those are the people that you talk. How are you, brother? Well, I'm blessed. Well, how are things really? I'm blessed.
Yeah, really? Yeah.
God's working on it. Yeah. It's all right.
It's like that's all you've got.
That's all
you have. Is...
And those people are stupefied, right? And they're stupefied by their own desire, right?
Yeah.
There's no honesty. There's no honesty. Bill Hybels.
There's no integrity in that.
No commentary on Bill Hybels.
Yeah.
But he had he wrote a book about like this thing that you just can't sit still on, right? That a person would find like an injustice that they just couldn't be silent about, that they had to do something about, a motivation, a call. And what it is, in large part, it is a recognition of suffering. When you are under the influence of an opiate, you don't feel the pain. And so a person in Christianity who doesn't feel another person's pain has lost the ability to express empathy. They don't share any of that burden. We're told bear one another's burdens,
because they're not in that baptism of anguish. They haven't gone down into that place of anguish. They haven't wept for the lost. They don't care because you're right. Because in some ways, oddly and strangely enough, Marx is right in some sense. Lenin is right, because when people see the shiny happy church people, most people that I know, they're like, oh, I don't want anything to do with that. This is fake. This is not real. This is superficial. Yep. And if there's people that are like that in evangelicals. Their marriage is falling apart, their family's falling apart, they're miserable, they're struggling with pornography, they're struggling with alcoholism, all kinds of things, but they're still professing Christ. And you ask them, how are you doing, brother? And they have the cliche, I'm good, I'm blessed by the best. On and on and on. And it's like, no, if you would get real with God and if you would get real with yourself, God would be able to move and to help you get in order whatever it is that you have in order. But we walk around like, we're more than conquerors, and I know all those things are true, and I know all those things mean something, and I know that all those things are eternal. But like, we have to come to a place where we got to stop being these shiny happy church people, because the world is sick of it.
Yeah. Well, the world's not listening. We become the priest, right? That goes and walks on the other side. We don't become
in Luke's gospel.
We don't become the Samaritan. We don't come alongside someone and say, like, dude, you're hurt. Right? Like, let me give of myself. What we say is, I have nothing to give you. Let me give you Jesus, and Jesus can take care of your problem.
Give somebody a bottle of water in the international district. Give somebody some clothes. Do the corporal works of mercy. Don't be afraid of the corporal works of mercy. That's just because it's attached to Catholic. Just because those are all biblical things people need to do. Is because you go up to somebody who's sitting on the pavement right now in this city right now, 100 degrees degrees outside,
100
and you
degrees.
try that cliche thing with them. You try, I'm blessed by the best, and you know, you
I got
have
no
your
stress.
you have your hair helmet and your chick track, and you have all of that, and you see just how far that shiny, happy church people is going to get with people who are broken, who are empty, who are dying right in front of you, and you're just going to give them a cliche.
Yeah, you know, that parable about the Samaritan, right? Luke 10:30, a man was going down from Jerusalem, from the holy city, right, to Jericho when he fell into the hands of robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going, saw him, walked on the other side, a Levite. So the inference here is that these are two of the purported religious class.
Yeah, it was the only time that Christ ever addressed the priestly caste, and most historians believe that they were coming back from performing priestly duties, as Nacho
Probably.
Libre would say, priestly duties.
Well,
but they were on their way back,
Yep.
so there was no reason they couldn't stop and get involved. They just simply chose not to.
Either that, or they'd have to wait until, you know, they'd have to live in sin for a whole year until they could go back to the temple.
Because they had
to get
they had
forgiven,
come in
right?
contact with someone who was unclean. Yeah, exactly.
Ridiculous. Like
Okay.
we find like this idea of the opiate, right? Christ talks about it when he says, you know, a person who puts their hand to the plow doesn't turn back. When he says, you know, if there's a cost to following, when he says don't turn aside and go back to those old things, he invites people to say, well, I can't go, I've got to do this, I've got to do that, I've got to bury my father,
the
I just
excuses,
got married,
procrastination.
all of those are the same kind of opiate. It is a delay of the inevitable. I don't want to deal with it now. So let me take something, or let me say something, let me apply this salve to my heart so that it doesn't feel, so that I'm not compelled or motivated to be obedient to Christ.
Yeah. Let's look at this one. Keychain and t-shirt Christianity. We're talking about religion as the opiate of the masses. Keychain and t-shirt Christianity. This type of Christianity is usually portrayed outwardly, but inwardly it is lacking in understanding and listening to those who are trying to... Keychain Christianity lacks in empathy and compassion towards the human condition. This type of Christianity lets the slogans and the cliche be their witness and their testimony.
Yeah.
I have some examples. I want to see what you think. This is one I saw the other day. Stand for the flag and kneel at the cross. Right? I stand for the flag and kneel at the cross. I stand for the flag and kneel at the cross. Right? That's keychain Christianity. That's t-shirt Christianity. Okay, in a brief way, like, what's wrong with stand for the flag and kneel at the cross? Like, why is that? That doesn't work. Why?
I mean, so the flag doesn't do any good for people, but the cross does. The flag is just a symbol of American government. And standing for the symbol of any government is contrary to what Christ said. Christ said it's not about governments. Christ said, give Caesar whatever Caesar wants. There you go. But give unto God what is God's.
Yeah, and he submitted to Pilate.
Yep. Yep. Right.
It's okay. Yeah.
I
understand, but go.
The pastor who led me to the Lord, he used to say about that t-shirt Christianity, he'd say, are you wearing the cross, or is the cross wearing you? And at the time I was like, yeah, you know, we should be wearing the cross. And it wasn't until like I got more and more mature in life that it's not the cross that we're to wear, it's the righteousness of God. It's the image of God in true righteousness and holiness. So my issue with stand for the flag, kneel for the cross, is that if you cannot stand for God's righteousness, you have no business kneeling at the cross.
Okay. Here's another one. A keychain, t-shirt, right? Hate the sin, but love the sinner.
Unbiblical.
It doesn't work.
Entirely unbiblical.
People hate sin and they hate the sinner.
Right.
Right?
Yeah, I mean,
like no, but that's been a mantra for like 30 years, right? I mean, I've seen it on t-shirts, I've seen it on keychains, I've seen it on bumper stickers, and like, I think that people have to have their eyes opened, or we just say those things. Well, brother, I hate the sin. I hate the sin, but I love the sinner. And it's like, no, you don't. You don't love the sinner. No, you don't. All you see is the LGBTQ. All you see is alcoholism. All you see is dope. All you see is the murder and the violence. That's all you see, and you hate that. And more than likely, if you're honest with yourselves, I don't know your heart, but I know there's been times in my life where I've had to repent because I hated the sin and I hated those who were committing the sin. So it's a complete double standard, right?
Absolutely. Timothy gets a letter from Paul about it, but mark this, 2 Timothy 3, there will be terrible times in the last days. People will be lovers of themselves, haters of you, lovers of me, lovers of money, right? I can't give to you because this is my money. You want something, you should go work. Boastful, I stand for the flag and kneel for the cross. Proud, abusive, discontent to their disobedient to their parents, ungrateful, unholy, without love, unforgiving, slanderous, without self-control. They have no filter when it comes to condemning someone. Brutal, not lovers of the good, treacherous, rash, conceited, lovers of pleasure. Oh, it feels so good that I am where I am and I am not that sinner. Rather than lovers of God, having a form of godliness but denying its power. And this is the passage that goes on to say, they are the kind who worm their way into televangelism and homes and gain control over weak-willed women who are loaded down with sins and are swayed by all kinds of evil desires, always learning, but never coming to a knowledge or an acknowledgement of the truth.
Yeah, that's a dangerous place to be. Okay, here's the famous one. What would Jesus do? Keychain Christianity, T-shirt Christianity. You know, what would Jesus do?
Yeah, that's the one where I think about it and then I don't do what Jesus would do.
Yeah. Like it's just some kind of like magic formula.
Yeah.
Like if I have it on, remember, if I have a bracelet that says that, if I have it on my T-shirt, if I have it on my keychain, I've got to. Well, what would Jesus? Well, I guess Jesus would do what was right, but most of the time you won't do what is right. No. Right, and that is why in this I put this Christianity is usually portrayed outwardly, but inwardly it's completely lacking and shallow,
full of rotten bones.
It's shallow, yeah. And the slogans and the cliches become the witness and the testimony. I can't tell you how many people I've come into contact with where you try to talk to them about something serious about Christianity, something serious about the harvest, something serious about worship, and they're just full of these slogans. They're full, and God bless them. Maybe they love the Lord. I hope that they do, but like this kind of T-shirt and keychain Christianity, it just doesn't work with people that are broken and are in a metaphorical hell. And people that embrace these slogans, like they'll condemn us for saying that the war zone's hell. They don't even see it there. They don't even see a possibility of a metaphorical hell.
Right.
They're like, oh, well, brother, you have no idea how bad hell is really going to be. I can't get behind that. I can't say things like that. And it's like, no, that person is on dope. Their body is screaming for more fentanyl every 10 minutes. Yep. They don't know what to do. They're thinking about walking out in front of a car, letting a car hit them. It's 100 degrees outside. They haven't had a bottle of water. They haven't had anything to eat. They haven't had anything to drink. They're broken. They hate their lives. They hate everything. They hate God maybe even, and you tell me that isn't hell? It is hell.
And that person who looks at them won't even sit down with them and say nothing. Not. Like, people can't just sit down and say nothing and just love people and just be compassionate, just be there. The last thing, or what I'd like to kind of encapsulate about that, cross and flag and these keychain Christian
flag and he with the cross. Yeah.
Is this: most of those folks look at the tag for the country of origin, right? Like, I'm not getting on a patriotic bandwagon here,
because we're not.
But patriots. They're made in China, right? Like we have this government animosity towards China and financial and all these other things. But this stuff is made in China.
The bumper sticker, the keychain.
Right. So you're bouncing around acting like some kind of Pharisee with this gigantic frontlet on your head, trying to tell people how righteous and holy you are. If you're that righteous, buy it in America. Right? If it's that important to you, then at least care for the people who are in China making this stuff that you are using to pretend that you're a Christian.
Yeah. Okay, here's another good one. Pure Flix Christianity. This type of Christianity reflects exactly what these terrible movies reflect. A perfect world.
Yep.
Where everyone gets saved.
Everyone's saved.
Everyone gets healed.
Everyone eats.
No one gets divorced. Everyone's marriage is restored. The community in which the movies and the narratives are placed in, they have no problems. They have no drug addiction. They have no poverty. They have no suffering. There's no violence. There's no hatred. There's no homelessness. And especially there is no LGBTQ people at all in the Pure Flix dome.
Right.
And I've gotten a lot of criticism for bashing Pure Flix, and I'm going to keep on doing it because that is not reality.
It's not reality.
That is almost pornographic in a sense, because pornography is not just limited to sexual photographs or sexual videos. No, that is fantasy land, and you can, people will watch these movies and the world is not like that.
Mm-hmm.
And the more that you watch that, and the more that you see that, you think that Christianity is really like that. You think that the communities should have no problems. The communities should have no drug problem. The communities should have no violence. Well, when you find a place like that, let us all know, because it doesn't exist where I live, and it doesn't really exist where you live.
No.
It might exist in your mind that is stupefied with this so-called opiate that it really is, like Lenin, religion is the opiate of the masses. It may exist in a fantasy land, but Pure Flix is not reality. And why is it so dangerous for a Christian to bombard their mind with Pure Flix and not look at other pieces of cinematography?
Well, it's a great question, and I hopefully have a great answer. I love how you compared it to, the utopia, this unreasonable standard. A lot of our motivation is not driven by a desire for righteousness, but it is driven by guilt and shame. And that is the opposite of the gospel. Guilt, shame, and condemnation are not part of the gospel, right? Absolutely. There is no bad news in the good news. There's no good news but. That's a stick and carrot gospel. And so here's the danger with that. When you create a utopia, or this utopian ideal that doesn't exist, you then hold people or yourself. Usually you don't hold yourself. You hold everybody else accountable to the standard that you yourself can't meet. You hold them accountable to an improbable and unreasonable standard, and then people start to feel guilty that they don't meet your expectations. And so you set the bar so high for people, you set your expectations so high for people that you set them up for absolute failure. And I think Proverbs 31, this is where one of the most dangerous passages in Scripture is Proverbs 31, starting in verse 10. There are people who want their wives to be a Proverbs 31 woman. What they want is they want to be those that sits at the gate, right? Her husband is respected at the city gate, verse 23, where he takes a seat among the elders of the land. She's doing all the work.
Yeah.
There isn't anything that the man is doing. And people hold this as a standard for their wives. And this is what we teach little girls, to be Proverbs 31 women.
And this is what we teach church people within our denominations. It's like some of these pastors, it's like, get off your butt and go to work and quit being a burden to the church.
You want to lead? Pick up a vacuum cleaner. Show your family how to vacuum. I'm not going to dig into the first 10 verses, but verse 4 and 5. And 6, verses 4, 5, and 7, 4 through 7 of Proverbs 31, most people wouldn't preach that as part of a message about a Proverbs 31 woman.
Yeah, they preach it on Mother's Day, and you know what I'm saying.
It is not for kings, O Lemuel, not for kings to drink wine, nor for rulers to crave beer, lest they drink and forget what the law decrees, and deprive all the oppressed of their rights. Give beer to those who are perishing, and wine to those who are in anguish. Let them drink and forget their poverty, and remember their misery no more. This is what those who are struggling with fentanyl, this is what they are experiencing. They are trying to forget their troubles. And the problem with religion as opiate of the people is that it allows me to forget your problems too.
Yeah.
And if I forget your problems, then I'm definitely not going to do anything about them. And that's why this closes verses 8 and 9. Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, for the rights of all who are destitute. Speak up and judge fairly. Defend the rights of the poor and needy.
Right. Exactly. Let's look at the administration bubble, right? Now remember that the context, to some within the realm of so-called Christendom, religion is to them, in a strange sense, an opiate or stupefying narcotic. The administration bubble. These types of individuals cannot and rarely have an impact on the outside world. Administrative Christians struggle to identify with anyone who is outside the realm of the church atmosphere. All their friends and acquaintances are either in the fivefold ministry or devoted to the church, the American flag, and good old-fashioned apple pie. Many of these Christians sponge off their congregations and are always boring us to death with concepts such as giving and paying tithes. Your administrative bubble.
Yep.
Right? Explain what your thoughts are about the administrative. Can a person get so ensconced in ministry and in polity and parliamentary procedures and in the Church of God or the Assemblies of God or the Baptist Church or the Southern Baptist, can they get so enmeshed and become such a cog in that wheel that they're unrelatable to anyone? Can
Absolutely.
it happen?
It happens all the time.
All right.
And I think it's the same critique that we as evangelicals would say about those, about Orthodox churches, right, who rely heavily on tradition, right? And stories that are handed down, and the liturgical element. Catholic churches that deal heavily with liturgical, but less with the tradition and the, stories that have been handed down. But both of them share in that common sense, the liturgy. We have our own Pentecostal liturgical approaches too. Like we do. Sure. I go to places, or I've been to church services, or I've preached at church services, and somebody says, "Well, that was a good service." I'm like, "How do you know?" And it's because someone was slain in the Spirit, or someone spoke in tongues, or someone came to the altar. And I'm like, "Yeah, but are they going to be here 3 months from now? Like, what kind of investment are we making in their lives?" There are people at our church that, one of them has come an incredibly long way and is now involved in some different parts of the service that they weren't before, because their life didn't reflect those things. And was there a time that they came to the altar? Yes. Was there a whole lot of backsliding in between? Yes. How did we keep working on that individual and others like them? We stayed relatable. We didn't set a standard that was unreasonable and unrealistic that no one can meet, and then let people get dejected because our administration of service, our administration of the church and the way that we operate things didn't put a burden on people that isn't supposed to be there.
Yeah.
We let people listen to God. We let them grow. Sometimes they stumble, but what we do is we sit there. We say, "I'll help you up. I'll help you up. I'll help you. I can't want it more than you do, but I'll help you up."
Yeah. And one of the greatest things that happened to me, and one of the hardest things, and one of the most humbling things that happened to me, was when I had to go back to work. And there were times where I was pastoring a church, but I had to go back to work.
That's all I've ever done.
And it helped me to be, it helped me to develop relationships and to understand where other people who were in the real world, where they were coming from. And it helped to keep me grounded in the harvest, right? And we were talking, you were reading the Proverbs, the Proverbs 31, and yeah, it would be wonderful, the days of having a church where all you do is show up and preach and do visits and do all these things, the days of that, I think, are the salad days. I think they're gone.
I've never been part of that. I've always worked.
Yeah, and so
I work now.
That's what I'm saying, and there's a lot of ministers. God bless them, but it's like, you've lived off the church long enough. I'm not saying that you've taken advantage of it long enough, but you're going broke. You need to get up and you need to go back to work, and you need to join the rest of us in the harvest, because this administrative bubble is not really working the way that it did 40, 50 years ago.
See, I wasn't a Christian 40, 50 years ago. I came into, I came into the church without the strain of that administrative bubble. Like, I always wanted to make a difference in my community, and I wasn't raised in a church. So as a young man,
you were raised as a humanitarian.
I was raised as in atheist humanism. Absolutely,
Humanism, yeah.
As a humanitarian in humanism, if you find a need, do something about it. If you see something's broken, do something to fix it. I volunteered for the Civil Air Patrol. I was a volunteer firefighter. I was a peer support specialist. I tried to find all these things, these different ways that I could engage with my community to try and bring about transformation in the world that I was in, but none of it had anything to do with what, like, you hear people talk about the gravy train in a church. It was all, if you want to make a difference, go work, take what you make and do something with it. So when I came into the church, that idea of like not working is not something that I've ever experienced. I've never served at a church other than for a very brief time at New Life, where the pastor wasn't working like full time.
And why do these ministers and why do these pastors, they get up there and they go on and on about tithing, they go on and on about giving? Why don't you ever hear about Christ being a carpenter for like how many years? 18 years. How come you never hear about Paul making tents? How come you never hear about Paul would say, remember in Ephesians, he says, you know that I have coveted no man's silver or gold. He says, I have worked with my own hands to provide for me and my companions. Therefore, I would not be a burden upon you. And I'm not, if you have a position to where you don't have to work, or God bless you, more power to you. But there are a lot of us in the mission states. There are a lot of us here in the state of New Mexico. There is no gravy train. There is no, we're taking the low road. We all have to get up. We have to go out there. We have to work hard and then come home. But God gives us the grace. People. There was a man in Ohio. He was a Russian minister. And he was a Christian, and he refused to take his salary. And I remember I was on the gravy train, and I thought, well, he's crazy. Why in the world does he want it? And I used to ask him, I said, Brother Stefan, I said, why don't you take a salary? And he goes, because I'm not going to be a burden to the church. I'm not going to be a burden to what God is trying to do here. And there was a big debate among many of my friends about whether he should take a salary, whether he shouldn't take a salary, whether this, whether that, whether this. Most pastors, we live humdrum lives. We work hard, we're tired, and we get up and do it every single day, and we do it for God, and we do it because we want to change our community, and that is what it is really about, in my opinion.
Yep. Totally agree.
Right?
Totally agree. That's why I do it, right? Like, as a volunteer firefighter, EMT for many years, like, you couldn't pay me to do that. I wouldn't do it. Right? And there's a need there. And the same with church. I mean, like, it would be great, but that's not why I do it. I don't know that I would do it if it was a gravy train. Like, I want skin in the game. I want to know I want to be able to run across someone who is struggling and be able to do something about it, and it not necessarily have to come out of the church.
Yeah.
Right? Like, if I can help somebody or put somebody to work or like anything, right? If I can do something, it's unto the Lord. No one else needs to know about it.
And you know what?
It's okay.
To be honest, if you and I were on a gravy train, we would fall into the same temptations that everybody else falls into on a gravy train.
Absolutely.
We would be tempted to take advantage of people. Yep. We would be tempted to take advantage of their giving. Yep. We would be tempted to sit around and watch television and not be working on the things that we're supposed to be working on, such as prayer, such as worship, such as Bible study. Yep. We would be tempted with those things, and you can't tell me that if you're on the gravy train or you're living in this administrative bubble that your life does not consist of temptations. You may not be tempted with prostitution, you may not be tempted with drug addiction, but you're tempted in some ways with what you can do to manipulate situations where you don't have to do as much as you're supposed to do, because that is the way that things actually work. And if you and I were on that gravy train, we would be tested and we would be tempted with those things, and we would have to try to figure out I think it's a battle we would constantly have to fight against.
Yep. I don't want to be a used cross salesman.
Yeah, like a used car salesman. Yeah, like a car salesman. Yeah.
Used cross.
Yeah.
Hey, this is a fine cross. No one's really used this cross. This
Yeah.
cross was owned by an old lady who
It
went to my
doesn't
church.
take that much to carry it. It's a lot lighter than the other ones. Yeah, exactly. And I'll give it to you for, such and such a price. I'll make you a deal on it. And you know what? America, people are tired of that. People are tired of hearing about begging for money. People are tired of hearing about begging for offerings and tithes. And I'm not talking about laity, but I'm talking about when people come in, and I've seen it over and over and over and over again. Let God do what He's going to do. We don't need a 5-point sermon every single time that somebody passes the offering plate. Yep. You know what? The sinners are tired of it, and those of us that are really trying to find God and search for pearls of great price, we're all sick and tired of that. Yep. And that's not going to be popular, but I don't really care. Everybody's tired about tithe and offering all the time.
They're going to take away my birthday.
There's so much more to life in church than just tithe and offering. You can dress it up, you can make it sound, you can manipulate it, but there's a lot of us that you're just not going to fool us anymore because we're tired of it, man.
The blessing, right, in our ministry, what I've seen happen in your ministry, what we've done together, like we have people that are not typical Christians that invest in what we do. Like I have people in my life that live radically different lives than I do, that when we sit and talk about real things and real life, those conversations often end with them saying something to me like, "You're doing good work out there. I support you." Right? And these are people that the church generally would treat as pariah, right? This is the kind of people that the church would go around pointing unclean, unclean, unclean. But that they can recognize the good work that God is doing is a testament to the fact that we're preaching the gospel with what we do, not just with the blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Okay, I've got this. We've got 2 more points. Christianity has been referred to, the religion is the opiate of the masses. There was one man that referred to it as mildew, from medieval mildew. Another person said that Christianity has been referred to as spiritual booze.
Oh, yeah.
What do we do with that?
I can't disagree. When Jesus was on the cross and they said, have some of this sour wine, right, to ease the pain, and he's like, no. We're like, oh, I'll take it. I'll take it. So
the gall. Yeah, that was an act of mercy, an act of charity from the women of Jerusalem, right? They would do that for the condemned man, and there was probably pharmakia or something that was put in that. It was they believe it was a concoction to alleviate suffering. You're right, but Christ refused the gall, the bitter gall, so that He might take on the sin of everything all at once. He didn't. He refused to be coddled, to be comforted, to be subdued, to be weakened by anything. Right?
But that's all we want.
We want the gall.
We want the gall. So freedom of choice is what we want, and freedom from choice is what we argue for. Right? It's the thing that we're after. We don't want to choose suffering. We don't want to choose, to be alive is to hurt, right? Life is to be painful.
Vulnerable.
Right?
And that's what makes it life.
That's what makes it life.
Yeah, because you have to have that possibility of failure. You have to have the possibility of suffering. You have to have the possibility of hardship, because if you don't, then it's not really life.
It's not life. And this fake gospel, this lifeboat gospel, this escapist gospel that we try and shove people down people's throats, which intellectuals look at this hooey that we try and spit at them, and there's a reason that we don't reach the intellectuals. There's a reason that sometimes intelligent people come to the gospel down a side road. They end up there, but the stuff that we try and peddle to them, they're not buying it. The broken aren't buying it either, because they're saying, I can confess Christ today, but I'm still going to be hungry tomorrow. And I read in the Bible that you're supposed to do something, and instead you tell me if I want bread, I got to go work. Well, I'd love to work, but I got 50 things standing in the way, and you just tell me, well, you should go work. Right? And I'm panhandling, I'm working, right? I'm working under the table for a green handshake, right? But you don't like the job I have.
Yeah, because you're not paying taxes on that great handshake.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, exactly. Or well, we can't give you bread, but the social organizations can give you whatever you need.
Yep. The things that the church should be able to give.
Yeah,
We
that
point
was
people to
always the
social.
church's responsibility.
It's never changed.
We've gotten to a place where we don't really like that anymore. It makes us uncomfortable anymore, and we don't want to do it anymore, and we don't have to do it anymore because now the state does it.
And then we complain about the state.
Yeah,
because we don't like the way they do it. But
Yeah.
we don't do it.
and they're persecuting us as believers.
Right, and so we want the gall. We want that bitter wine because we don't want to feel. We refuse to express empathy. Because we don't understand how to express empathy for another person, we've entirely lost the ability to have any sympathy for another person.
Oh yeah, terrible, but true. All right, here we go. On the topic of Christianity has been referred to as spiritual booze. I have this question: why do so many Pentecostals? Why do so many Pentecostals seem to experience more hardship, suffering, persecution than, say, a Baptist, a Lutheran, a Presbyterian, a Catholic, etc.? It seems to me that there's something about distinctly, and I'm not saying that all Pentecostals are going to die a horrible death, that they're going to get cancer, that all these awful, terrible things are going to happen to a Pentecostal person. But it seems like a Pentecostal, that if you're Pentecostal and you're truly pursuing Christ as a Pentecostal, it seems like you're going to come up against a whole lot more opposition than, say, somebody else. Why is that? I mean, there may not be an answer for that. I don't know. I really don't know. But there is. It does seem to me, and I asked a good friend of mine this, and he told me, he says, because it seems to me like when you're Pentecostal and you're trying to be led by the Spirit, you're trying to do the work of the Holy Spirit, be the church in your community, be the church to the lost, win the harvest. He says you're going to encounter much more opposition. But then he said this, and I think this is wise, and I think this is true. He says, but then there are others who would opt for that. They see living a life of sorrow and poverty and hardship as a badge of honor as a Pentecostal. And I think there's some truth in that. Not all of it's true, but
I don't know that you can say that a Pentecostal suffers more or less than a Baptist or a Lutheran. I know people of all walks of life who have lost someone they love in a car accident, right? For example, my dad would not consider himself a Christian. I would consider myself a Christian. I would consider myself a Pentecostal Christian, where early in my walk I would have considered myself an evangelical and somewhat Pentecostal Christian, but now I would consider myself a Pentecostal Christian. We both lost when my mom died, right? My dad suffered the same thing I suffered, right? I don't suffer more or less. Maybe I suffer less because I have Christ, because I have less questions about this, that, or the other. But I think maybe sometimes Pentecostals complain more. But I don't know that they actually suffer more. I think everybody suffers. And I don't know that they're necessarily good at enduring hardship like a good soldier, because what I often hear is, well, the devil this and the devil that, and the devil this and the devil that, and so
the devil.
So I think some of that suffering, that persecution, is not necessarily the fruit of the enemy's pursuit of them, but it's rather consequences of
And this whole the devil stuff. I got a flat tire and the devil doesn't want me to get to church because the devil's working overtime today. No, he's not.
No,
they shingled your neighbor's roof. The wind blew the shingles off of the roof. There was a shingle that had a nail in it, and you ran over the nail. And you mean to tell me that the great dragon, the great Satan himself, is concerned about you? And if he can stop you, then he's going to just shut down this witness. If he can silence you and shut up your mouth, your ministry that's going to compel thousands of people to come to Jesus. You mean to tell me that Satan is locked in and horned in on you, and if he can get rid of you're the key piece to why everything will fall apart? No, friend, you are not that important. Life just happens. I'm not denying that there are not demonic oppression, that there is not spirit. I'm not denying that, but Christians have to come to stop blaming the devil on everything. Take a good look in the mirror and let God search your heart, because most of the time it is you and not the old devil or old Scratch.
Stop thinking that God has that the devil has the same power as
You're
God.
so important.
Yeah. Well, and that somehow the devil has God's power, right? That he's just as omniscient.
We're arm wrestling the devil and Satan. No.
The devil walked out of his morning staff meeting. He said, if I could get Cisco to not go to church, we win, brother.
The whole world will
win.
just fall apart. Come on. Yeah. And that's true, but people see that because they don't understand. They don't understand basic classical Christianity, because basic classical Christianity, it's not a good versus evil. It's not this this boxing match and where Satan hits Christ and then Christ takes a few blows and loses a few rounds, but then he comes back and that is so it's not like that. The devil's in the sound system. The devil's in this. The devil's in that. The devil's in that. You forgot to put the batteries in the microphone. You forgot to turn. You forgot to turn on the computer to do the praise worship. You forgot to. No, the devil doesn't have anything to do with those things, right? Waylon Jennings said, the devil made me do it once, but the second time I did it all on my own. It's like, no, Christians have to stop blaming every single little thing on the devil, because like if Satan can stop Alonzo Garcia, the town of Albuquerque will never, thousands of people will never come to Christ. Do we really think that highly of ourselves? Do we really see ourselves? Are we that deceived that we're that important, and without us, the whole structure will collapse?
Isn't that what Paul was saying to Timothy? He says, for in those days people will become lovers of themselves. It's
you touched on that. Let's get into this last criticism, because this is going to take a minute, not too long. We're just going to take a few minutes with this. All right. There have been many throughout the dispensations of time that have claimed that Christianity is a crutch for the weak. This is almost a Nietzschean criticism, that Christianity is for weak people. Right? So we've gone to religion as the opiate of the masses, but Nietzsche would say that Christianity is a crutch for the weak, or that Christianity is for weak people. I think some of that's true, but I also think that some of that is not true as well.
So I think it rests on some real shaky logical premises, right? So all philosophy is based in logic, right? Logic and philosophy are partners for a reason, right? So the idea of escapism is a crutch for the weak is a fair statement. Now, you can substitute any pronoun or noun that you want. Drink, drugs, pornography, jogging, like any of those things. And then you run into an actual discussion of those things. Is jogging for the weak? No. Like, I'm not very good at jogging, right? I could say that jogging is escapism for a person because they want to run away from their problems, right? I could make a play on words, right? Metaphorically, running away from your problems.
Figuratively, yeah.
But like, I can't run.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think it's dangerous to make some of those logical propositions because I think they fall rather quickly.
Yeah, well, this is something I wanted to ask you about because I know that you know, and I am not by any stretch of the imagination well versed in Nietzsche at all, but he does interest me, and he challenges me to think. But Nietzsche would say that a Christian is a slave to their morality, right?
So keep in mind that the largest part of Nietzsche and his writing is a refutation of Kant. If you are not familiar with Kant, Kant is most well known for the categorical imperative, right? To say that you do the thing that you would want to be done universally, right? Like, do the right thing because you want the right thing you want everyone to do the right thing. So the idea of morality always comes down to the question of yes, but whose? Is it a moral discussion? Is it an immoral discussion? Well, who says? According to whose standard of morals? And so Christians would say, well, we follow God's moral standard. Now, God has a legalistic standard, but the moral standard is do unto others as you would have them do unto you, rule, right? Yeah. And so that form of the golden rule appears in all of these things. And so Nietzsche's heart attitude toward, and the reason that he wrote most of what he wrote, is a refutation of everyone's being enamored with Kant. And Nietzsche also wrote, he's like, I don't understand why German philosophy has to be so complicated. It's not that complicated. Life is very simple. But in this, you had Heidegger, you had Kant, you have
Freud,
Hegel, you have Freud comes later, you have Heidegger, you have all these different German philosophers, and German philosophy has its own world, just like Greek philosophy has its own world. There's not a whole lot of discussion about Roman philosophy, right? Yeah. But there's Roman Stoicism, right? But there's not a whole lot of discussion. But in German philosophy and in Greek philosophy, you have some of these ideas. And so Nietzsche's criticism of all of these people who are not Christians, his refutation is all you have done is dressed Christianity up again. So his critique of, say, Kant would be that Kant never directly addresses anything, right? And so people who are Christians don't really directly address anything. They answer the question by giving the question as an answer, right? Like, why do you believe what I believe? Well, I believe it because God said it. Well, God said it, but how do you know God said it? Well, it's in the Bible. God said it because it's in the Bible. Yeah. So Nietzsche's framework then rests heavily on his challenges to the way that other German philosophers were looking at the world. And so in that concept, it's really hard to separate that, like when Nietzsche, when you have the statement God is dead, when you have the statement that Christians are jerks, it's so easy to put everything together under this one umbrella. But when he makes the argument about Christians being slaves, he is saying that they are slaves to the circular argument that they make, and they lack the ability to step outside of that and move beyond just their predefined
and to make their own decisions, to try to carve out their own path, to do what they think is right, to disregard, to step into the Superman or the Overman. So if you acquiesce to the Ubermensch, then you are going to take you're going to do what you see is right, what you feel is right, and whatever the consequences are for somebody else, then too bad.
Which is Kant's categorical imperative.
Yeah.
Do what you would have be
Yeah.
done universally.
Like on okay, like Moby Dick, right? Like in
Yep.
Melville, right? Starbuck has in the passage of Moby Dick, in the book of Moby Dick, in the novel of Moby Dick, Starbuck has an opportunity to kill Ahab,
And he does.
he knows that
Yep.
if he can kill Ahab, that he will stop the madness,
Yep.
he will stop the destruction, he will stop the downward
Yep.
spiral. But Starbuck does not have the capacity to move into the
No.
Ubermensch or the Superman,
No.
because he is a slave to his morality,
Yes.
and his morality says you shall not murder, you shall not
Because
kill.
it's circular.
Yeah, so that's a good way
Yes.
to see that, right?
100%. That is
Because
exactly.
Starbuck can't do it.
Starbuck can't do it. And Melville would have leaned heavily upon the writers of his time, and those would have been his peers. Nietzschean philosophy, Heidegger, Hegel, Kierkegaard, they were all writing in that same period of the 1830s to the 1860s. All
I
of
see.
those
Okay,
would
okay.
have been
Yeah.
the kind of thing that in his spheres of influence, the paper that he read and picked up, the stuff that he talked about, the people that came from
Yeah,
overseas.
Queequeg shows more dignity and more charity than the Christian from Nantucket.
Yeah.
And he makes those, he shows that
Yes.
vividly, and it was really a slap in the face
Absolutely.
to organized religion.
Absolutely, because
Because Queequeg's a savage.
right, who was incredibly kind and gentle and like protective of Ishmael. Like
Yeah.
just there's so many.
He
different...
wouldn't even been able to get aboard the ship
No.
if it wasn't for Queequeg. Yeah.
Yep.
Well, we hope that you have enjoyed this tonight. So we've talked about, is religion the opiate for the masses? It's not as simple as some would make it. So in some ways it is, in some ways it isn't. And so we hope that you've enjoyed the content. Please watch it, please share it, and God bless you. Good night.
Good night.